Hello, and welcome back for the second part of this tutorial. Last time we got our character set up, and we went ahead and made it so that we can swing the weapon, but that's pretty much all that we did so far. So, in this video, we're going to tackle a few simple things just to get this a little bit more configured for drawing and sheathing the weapon, as well as turning the blade on and off. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So first thing we're going to need to do is we are going to need to go ahead and find our third person character. Now we still have our melee function here, so I'm just going to grab all this, pull it down a little bit so it's a little bit more by itself. Hit C to put a comment around it. Call this melee attack. Adjust the size a little bit. And then, just for clarification, we'll adjust the color a little bit so that it stands out a bit. So go ahead and move that a little bit. We'll start our new function over here. So previously we were just using a straight key binding. Let's go ahead and replace that with an actual input. So we'll go up here, go to Project Settings, and pull that off from my other screen. Scroll down, go to Input, and then we're going to add a new input and call this melee attack. Then we can go in here and set up our bindings for this. So let's say left mouse button, and then we'll also add in keyboard, or no, not keyboard. You want gamepad. So let's say you're using a Xbox or a PlayStation controller, and you want to be able to hit a button. We'll say face button left, which would be X on an Xbox controller, or it would be the square button on a PlayStation controller, I believe. So we'll go ahead and set that up, and then we can add another input while we're in here, and we will call this draw weapon. And you can set this key to whatever you want. I'm gonna set it to F for the keyboard because it's right next to where the movement keys are, so it's I don't have to move my fingers too far. And then for the gamepad, let's see. How about we do gamepad, directional pad. Let's do right. Doesn't really matter. We might change this later, but for now that should be fine. So we'll go ahead and we'll close this, and we'll do melee attack. And we can control click to drag that off, and then we can just delete this and get rid of it. And now we have our actual input action, which we can bind this to whatever keys that we want. Next, we're going to go over here so that we have some more space, and we're going to do draw weapon. Alright, and then from the previous video, we pretty much only set up the weapon, but since we are going to have the weapon be able to damage the player, let's go ahead and set up health variables for our character. So we will go and call this health. Go up here and we'll make this a float. Hit compile. We'll set this to, let's say 100. Compile, save. We'll add another variable and call this health max. And then this will be the value for the maximum health that the character can have, which we will use for when we're calculating damage, to make sure that if we're healing the character, we don't heal past what their maximum should be. So we'll go ahead and compile so we can set that one too, and we'll set that to 100 as well. And then those can be updated to different values at runtime if you need to, so say like if the character levels up or something like that. But we're not going to worry about leveling systems for right now, so we're going to go ahead and go in here, and we're going to grab our health variable. We're going to drag off and do greater than. So if your health is greater than 0, we're going to hold down B and click to create a branch. Connect that up, because we're going to make sure that we actually have health before we allow the player to attack or draw their weapon or do any other action for that matter. So we're actually going to select those, and sure, why not? We'll collapse this into a macro and call this get is alive. We will open this up, and then we will add execute output. We'll just call that exec. And we'll call this true, and then we'll create another one and call this one false. Compile, save. We can close that window out. And now, instead of having all that extra nodes in there, we have this one small node that does the exact same thing. So we can go ahead from here and just Control-C to copy that. And we can come down here to our attack, pull this back, and then drop this in right there. We're not going to worry about touch inputs, so we can go ahead and just delete this from our character. But we are going to pull this out a little bit. And we're only going to worry about putting this on the jump function, because we don't want to stop the player from being able to stop jumping if they're dead, because I think that the way that it works, it really won't influence too much, but once the character dies, we want to make it so that if you do let go of the jump button, they'll just drop regardless. But we'll worry about that kind of stuff later. We can leave that alone. We can leave that alone. For a movement input, actually, we can go up here. We can delete this because we're not doing VR. We can Control-V, Control-V. And then this will make sure that if our player dies, they won't be able to move. And then because we already set up our health values, the character should be able to move still. So let's compile, save, and test just to make sure. So, of course, you notice there isn't a little bit of an issue when we're jumping, so let's go ahead and fix that real quick. So in our animation blueprint, we'll go ahead and open that. We'll go into our state machine, and we have our jump start, our jump loop, and our jump end animations, and these are all the default ones from the third person template. So again, from what I was saying in the last video, there's no animations on the IK target. So because of that, we're gonna have to get some animations that do have animations on that. So let's go ahead and look in here, see if we can find our jump start, jump land, and then jump loop. We're gonna right click, duplicate and retarget. We'll make sure we select our skeleton, then go back in here, set it to the mannequin folder like we did before, click retarget. Now we have our new options for these. So let's go ahead and select that one. Then we can go into jump start. And we're going to change that to jump start. Then we'll back out. And then that looks like that updated automatically, so we shouldn't have to do anything with that. But let's go ahead and set this one now. So we want our jump loop, and then go ahead and grab jump land. So we can test that now. Now, when our character jumps, you'll notice that the weapon actually stays in their hand now because there's actually an animation there on the IK target. Okay, so we can go ahead and close that. We're not going to worry about the feet sliding when you're landing, or how long the landing animation takes. We can worry about cleaning that up in a different video. Alright, so now that that's all set up, let's go ahead, go back into this function here, and we're going to get our weapon component, or weapon child component, and we're going to get our actor. So we get the child actor from that. And then we are going to cast that to our lightsaber. So this will set up our ability to call functions on the lightsaber itself, but currently we don't actually have any functions on the lightsaber. It's like if we go and open it up, we'll see that we still have just the default grayed out functions here. So let's go ahead and hang on one second, gotta consult some stuff. So, okay, so let's go ahead and we'll delete these because we're not going to need those. And we will add an event and call this draw weapon. Actually, no. We need to create a custom event and call this draw, or call it activate weapon, just to distinguish it from the input name. So we'll call it that, and then we will create another function, call this deactivate weapon. And then we're going to go into our variables, we're going to add a bool, and we're going to call this weapon is drawn. And we're going to set this to true when we draw it. And we're going to set this to false when we deactivate it. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to play sound at location. And we're going to go ahead and get actor location. So it's just going to play the sound where the lightsaber itself is at. And then we'll go ahead and we will go back into the place where we put our sound files. Depending on where you put them, they might be in a different folder structure, but this is just where I put all the sound effects that I have. So I'm gonna go in here and let's check this one. I think that one will work. So let's go ahead and we'll select that. And we will set that to play. And then under our attenuation settings, because we're going to want to set this up once we start firing off sounds, because otherwise the sound is going to be heard from anywhere on the map, which would be slightly problematic if, say, an enemy turns on their lightsaber but they're like a mile away. You shouldn't be able to hear it as though they're standing right next to you. So let's go ahead and go back into our sound folder and we'll set up, let's get rid of you. Sounds, sound attenuation, and we'll call this effect attenuation. Now, we're not really going to worry about any of the settings in here because for the most part the default settings are pretty decent for what they are. You can always tweak the inner radius and the fall off distance depending on like if you want the sound to be heard from further away for like explosions or characters shouting or stuff like that. But for just the sound effects for the lightsaber, we're not going to really worry about that. We're just going to leave that as is. And then we will go ahead and select it under our attenuation settings on here. We're not going to worry about concurrency settings right now. So we're going to go ahead and leave that as is. And then since we are going to be doing sound effects, let's go ahead, go back into our blueprint folder, and we're going to create a blueprint class. And we're going to go into our search bar and look for game instance. We're going to do just the regular game instance, and we're going to select that, and we're going to call this tutorial game inst BP. We're going to go ahead and open that. And we're going to add in a variable and call this effects volume. We're going to change this to a float. I'm going to change that to, let's say, 0.7 for default, so it's not completely turned up, but it's not really turned down that much either. So we'll leave that as the default, and we're going to go and go back into our project settings, and we're going to go into, I believe it's maps and modes, and down here at the bottom you'll find game instance class. We're going to go ahead, pop this open, and we're going to set that to the game instance that we just created. So now this will have variables that you can store in that'll be shared even when you load across different maps. So like, say for instance, if you want to have global variables that are tracked across different sessions or stuff, so like for example, if the character has some type of currency that they're collecting, like coins in Mario for instance, you would track that through this, and then you could keep track of how many coins they are collecting as they go from one map to the next, depending on how you're loading, and it'll all be tracked within the game instance. And then from there you can set up all your save classes and whatnot to actually save the information across different sessions of the game. But so long as you don't close the game, everything will be tracked from inside the game instance. So we'll go ahead and close that. We'll go back into here and close this, because I think we're done with this for right this second. And we're going to go up here and do begin play, because we're going to need to set up our reference to that game instance. So we're going to get our game instance, we're going to cast to our Lightsaber game instance, and then we are going to promote this to a variable and call this our game inst underscore, or actually no underscore, we'll just do ref, because it puts the spaces in there automatically anyways on the nodes. So now when the game starts, the weapon's going to fire this event, so it's going to set up that reference for us. So we can go ahead and get it, and then we can get our effects volume, and then we can just plug that into our volume multiplier. Now you have the ability to pull up the volume for all your sound effects from these two nodes, so long as you make sure to set up the variable for it. And then you can do this for every object that's going to be making different sounds, so that you can control the volume without it all being just one volume level. So we'll go ahead and we'll minimize that. And then from here, we're going to create a timeline. Now, timelines are actually pretty useful because you can set them up so that they loop for if you want to do like certain functions that keep repeating, you can set them up from here. We're just going to call this if I can type, activate blade. And we're going to drag that down there instead. And then we'll double click it to open it. And we are going to set this to, let's say 0.2. And then we will add a float track and call this scale. Then we're going to right click in here, add a key. We're going to make sure you're at 0 and you're at 0, and then we're going to right click and add another key. We're going to put you at 0.2, so you're at the end of this, and then we're going to put this at what did we set our blade to? It's at 1, 1, and 7, so we're going to set this at 0.7. So we're going to go ahead and close that, compile save, just to be sure that we don't lose any progress, and actually we'll just do save all. And then from here we're going to go ahead and pull off of our update, and we're going to do set relative scale. And we'll go ahead and click on this one. It'll automatically grab our blade mesh, and we are going to make vector, and we're going to say 1, 1, and then we're going to pull off of here, and we're going to get ourselves a lerp, and we're going to have this go from 0 to 0.7. We're going to plug this in here, and actually we're going to change this, so we're going to actually have this be 0 to 1, so that way when this outputs as 0, it'll output into here as 0, so that the length of the blade from the z-axis will be zeroed out, so it'll shrink the blade down, and then when this is at 1, it'll gradually transition over to the B input, and it'll put it at 0.7, so it'll be at 70% of its normal scale. And then you can adjust this up higher or lower depending on how long or short you want your blade. And then you can also do something similar if you really wanted, because like if you go in here, you can add additional tracks if you want, and then if you want to remove them, you just right click and hit delete. So you can add in as many float tracks as you need to track the different axes if you want, or you can go in here and you can add a vector track which will track all three. But we're only really going to scale on the z-axis, so we won't worry about that too much. So that will go ahead and that will update whenever it's called, and it'll go from the beginning of the timeline to the end of the timeline when it gets to 1, and it'll scale the blade up. Now we're going to do the exact same thing in reverse, and we're going to, real quick, we're going to add in some event and attack, and we're going to use this later, but we just want to set up the function now so that we can call it here, because when we go to sheath the weapon, we want to make sure that we deactivate the weapon. So we'll go ahead and call end attack, and we're going to call fade out. Actually, I don't know if we can call that. Here we go, fade out. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our sounds, because we still have one more thing that we need to set up, and that is we need our sound effect for when the lightsaber is just idle. So I have this sound, and if we double click to open it, we'll see that we can disable that. We'll pull this out, and we can see that our node is set to looping, so that this idle effect will just continuously loop. And then we'll go ahead and save that. And then in here we're going to add an audio component, and it's going to automatically select the one that we had. So we'll just call this saber hum effect. And we'll go ahead and drag this in, connect that in, and then we will connect that up and drag you up. And then we're going to set the fade out duration to 0.1. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to copy this. We'll drag this over so we have a little bit more room. We're going to paste this in here. And then instead of the turning on sound, we're we're going to go in here and we're going to find, let's see, yeah, I think this is the sound. So we'll go ahead and we'll replace the sound effect for that with this, and then we will drag this into reverse from end. So this way, when you call it from here, it's gonna go from 0 to 1, and when you call it from this note, this input, it's gonna go from 1 to 0. So if you call the deactivate, it'll scale the blade down, and if you call the activate, it's going to scale the blade up. So we'll go ahead from the finished node and we're going to do a branch, and we're going to grab our weapon is drawn and plug that right in there. And then we are going to do, we're going to drag this in and we're going to call fade in. And set that right there. We'll call that for 0.1. So this will take our hum effect, and if the weapon gets activated after it goes through this, it'll fade the sound back on, and if it's being deactivated, it won't do anything because we want to fade it out as we're playing the deactivation sound. So we can go ahead and we can leave these alone for right now, because I think the fade in duration of 0.1 should be good. So we will go ahead and compile and save. And I think that will cover it for that function. So now when we go back to our character, we can go ahead and drag off of our cast the lightsaber, and we can call, let's get weapon is drawn. And then we will do a B click to get a branch. We'll go ahead and plug that in. Pull off and get our activate weapon. And then pull off again and get deactivate weapon. And actually, no, we're going to do this in reverse. And just to clean this up, we're going to double click to create a reroute node. We're going to... Whoa, what the heck was that? I think it just registered as a double click when I went to try and pull off, I'm not sure. But anyways, okay, so we have this set up now so that when the weapon is already drawn, we're going to go ahead and we're going to deactivate it, which will change this bool value after that to be false. And then when it's not drawn, it's going to read as false, and it'll go through and it'll turn the weapon on. So if we compile, save, we'll go ahead and save all. Now, if we press our binding, we'll notice there's slightly an issue there, because when we started, there was that pop. It's like, if we open back up again, I'll press my key. It's assuming that the weapon is not drawn currently, so let's go ahead and fix that. So our default value is false, and that would be why. So now it's fixed. Alright, and then the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to actually need to play our animation for actually drawing and sheathing the weapons so that the character pulls the lightsaber out when they're going to use it, and when they're not using it, they're going to put it back on their belt, for instance. So we'll go ahead and we're going to actually pull these out because we don't necessarily want those to happen right away. And what we are going to do is we're going to add a custom event. We're going to call this force draw weapon. And we're going to plug this in to we're going to leave this here for right now, actually. But what we're going to use this for later is we're going to use this to force it so that if you go to do a melee attack and the weapon is not drawn, this will fire so that it'll activate the weapon. But we're going to hook that up after we set up our montages. So we're going to pull off here and we're going to get play montage. And then from here, I don't think we set up our draw animations. No, I don't think we did. So let's go in here and let's see. Actually, I think it might have been in the expansion set. So let's go in here and let's check in here and we will common. Here we go. So if we open this up, I think that was the animation I was using before, so we'll go ahead and we'll grab that too. And then we'll grab unarm, which I believe is sheathing it. So we will create a folder just to keep this organized. And we will grab both of those, right click, go to retarget, duplicate. We're going to set those to be our main skeleton. We're going to change our folder, and these were under common in place, and then put them in our mannequin folder. We'll click retarget, and we'll grab both of these and we will right click and create anim montages. So let's go ahead and pop this open real quick because we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to go and set this to the upper slot. And then actually, no, yeah, we're going to have that as the upper slot. We'll worry about cleaning that up later. And then we'll go and pop open the other one as well. We're going to set that to the upper slot too. And then just to make sure that these are actually going to play, we're going to go back to our anim graph. And then we're going to pull this up actually. We're going to type in cache to create a new saved cache pose. And we're going to name this locomotion. Oh. Just add in cache just to make sure that we know what it is. And then now when we type in locomotion, we can get this, and then we can do our blend poses. layered blend per bone, I believe it is. So we'll plug that in, and then we will create a copy, paste this over here, and then we will copy and paste that, and then on this one, instead of the default slot, we're going to have the upper slot. Then we're going to go up here, connect these up, and then we're going to connect this, and then in here, we're going to go into our layer setup and open this up, and we're going to add an element, and here we're going to need a bone name for where we're going to start the blending from. So if we look at our skeleton, we can see that the way that the skeleton works, everything comes off the root, goes to the pelvis, and then from the pelvis it either goes up through the spine or it goes down through the legs. So we want everything from the upper body, so we're going to grab our spine and we'll right click, copy select bone name just to make sure we have the actual name. And then we'll go in here and we will just paste that in so that it is spine _ 01. So everything above that will blend to that slot. So everything being fed into here will be fed into this. And then I'm not really sure what blend depth does, but we'll say set this to like 20 or something. I'm not sure if it really matters. And then we'll go ahead and compile, save, and we'll go back to our, and actually we can close this, and we can close this. And we don't need this open anymore either. So we can close those. Now when we look in here, we can grab our equip montage, which will go into our activate weapon. And then we will copy and paste. And then this one we're going to have be the unarm montage. And we'll put that into true. And then from here we are going to pull you up, and we're going to pop you into here directly, and we're gonna adjust you a little bit to get you out of the way, and we're gonna worry about deactivating it for right now because currently the player just has the weapon active, so we're gonna set up sheathing it first. So first we're going to do a delay, and we're going to set this to something relatively small, so we'll say like 0.15, and then we will do a bool and go ahead and drag that all the way over, and we'll add some reroute nodes just to clean it up a little bit, make it not so awkward looking, because we're also going to need this for the other function possibly. So let's hook that up, and then from here we're going to check to see, are we actually deactivating the weapon? If so, then we're going to attach to component, and then we're going to get our mesh and set that to the parent, and then we are going to get our weapon component, and we're gonna get the actor from it. So we'll grab our child actor and plug that into here. And the next thing, because we actually need to do one more thing with our mesh, so let's pop back into our skeleton. We can close that. So the next thing we're going to need is, we already set up our socket for where the weapon is when they're holding it. We need to set one up now for when it's sheathed. So let's go ahead and kind of minimize that and go on to the pelvis, and we will add socket. And we will rename this sheath socket. And you'll notice that it's zeroed out to exactly where the pelvis is, but if we look at our character in the viewport here, we'll probably want to put it like right around here or somewhere, because that like looks like it would be a belt clip kind of thing for holding onto a lightsaber or something like that. So we'll try to aim for that. So we'll go ahead and we will pull this out and up a little bit and probably bring it forward, and we'll hit F to focus on it so we can rotate a little bit more cleanly. And then we'll save, and then from here we're going to temporarily take this and change it from our weapon socket to our sheath socket, just so we can line this up a little bit. And we'll notice that it's kind of close, but it's at a really weird angle. So let's rotate it by like 90 degrees. So actually let's do like, no, yeah, 90, and save. And we can see that that's a little bit closer, but it's like clipping into the leg, so maybe, yeah, rotate it back out a little bit and then check it again. And it's a little bit too into his belt, and like if we look at our lightsaber mesh itself, we can see that we have like this ring for like where it's supposed to clip, so we kind of want to aim that to be a little bit closer to where the belt clip is. So we're gonna try and pull this down slightly and out, and then pull this back a little bit, and then save. Let's see how that looks. Probably pull it down a little bit more. That's pretty good. I think that kind of gets the point across that it's supposed to be sheathed. So we can go ahead and we can pop this back. Or actually, no. Let's go ahead and just leave it on sheathed for the moment. And we're going to go ahead and we will go into our lightsaber. We're going to go to our blade, and we're going to go to our scale and set the Z for this to be 0 by default. So now if we look at our mesh in here, it's already scaled down, and then we're going to go into here and we are going to scroll all the way down, and we are going to disable auto activate, so that way the sound effect's not going to be playing by default. So we'll compile and save that. Now when we look in here, it's just clipped onto his belt. Compile, save. Alright, now we can go back into here, and we want this as our socket, so we're going to copy that name, and then we'll paste that into here. And then we want our location, snap to target, we want rotation, snap to target, and we'll snap target for scale as well. And we can adjust these a little bit so they're not so all over the place. And then we will go ahead and we will copy this whole thing, and we are going to pull this out, and we will do this in a slightly different order because we want the blade to activate only after the character grabs the weapon. We don't want it to activate and like stab into their leg because that would look a little awkward. So we're going to pull this over here and we're going to call this weapon socket R, I think is what it was called. Yeah, weapon socket R. So all the other settings are basically going to be left the same, and then we're going to do a short delay off this like we did before with the other thing, and we're going to do 0.15 because that seemed like it was a decent number from my tests. So we'll plug that in here, and then we will go ahead and we're actually going to get these. We're going to copy, and just to clean this up so that we don't have wires going everywhere, we're going to right click on this and convert this to a pure cast because we're just going to leave our weapon class by default all come from the lightsaber, and then we can just change or adjust the functionality later, and then we'll just plug that right in there. So now when we go to test this, we'll compile, save all, and we'll notice that there was a slight issue there, and that's because we changed this earlier. So let's go ahead and change that back to false. Now let's test. And we notice that there's kind of an issue here. The animation doesn't seem to actually be playing. So let's see what's going on with that. So let's go back in here. We'll go back on to our animation blueprint. We got our upper slots set, and our animations were set to the upper slot, so they should be playing. Let's try scaling that up to like 100, see what happens. No. Hang on one second while I troubleshoot this. Okay, I see what I did. When we're calling the montages, we didn't actually specify our skeleton mesh. So let's fix that real quick. We will drag this in, and we will go ahead and plug you into our skeletal mesh component target. We'll copy you and paste you up here too. Plug you in there. Now it should work. So save all. And you notice there's some slight issues with it still just hovering there. And that's because we do have an issue where when we're doing our blend in here, we're blending off the spine, but we're not doing anything off the IK targets. So if we look in here, and let's minimize this, we'll notice that it goes from the root to the pelvis, and then the pelvis to the spine, but the IK targets are all off of the root, not the pelvis. So since we're blending everything above the spine, nothing from these is actually being blended. So we can fix this, but it's going to be kind of a hacky solution. So for the moment, we're going to just grab our IK hand root. We'll copy the name, we'll go in here, and we are going to add another element, paste the name, we'll say like 5 or something, I don't know. Compile, save. And you notice that there's a slight issue there where it's not really attached to the character's hand, it's kind of floating around. It's like, I suppose that works okay if you want to say that, oh yeah, they're using the Force to be more flamboyant as they draw their weapon. But the other thing that we're noticing is that it's snapping the weapon back to the waist before the animation is actually finishing, so let's go ahead and on the sheath we'll put in a slightly bigger delay. So let's grab our sheathing animation. We'll look to see, let's say like right about here, which would be 0.888. So we'll increase our delay here. And then that'll delay when it's attached to the sheathed socket. So now it grabs the weapon real quick, and then there's a slight delay where they're still holding it. But real quick, I'm just gonna run through a very frustrating issue that I was having with regards to these animations, because they're not really made to perfectly blend, and there's really no way to smoothly blend this. So if I go into my other project for a moment, I'm going to pull this open so I can see exactly what I'm looking at. Okay, so what we are going to do is we're going to go ahead and in our event graph, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a copy of you, bring you over here, just so we don't have wires going all over the place. We're going to do a cast to our third person character. Or actually, no, we don't need to do that. We want to get is montage playing. Here we are. So we'll grab this and we will go ahead and we will make a copy so that we have two of them, and we're going to set one of them to be our equip and one of them to be our unarm. I'm going to do or to get both. We'll call this is drawing weapon. And then this way, if it's playing either of these montages, it'll set our bool to true, which we are then going to go into our anim graph, and we are going to get a copy bone node. And what we are going to do is we are going to get our source bone, which we will say is the right hand, and our target bone, which is the bone that we need to move, and we will call this off of IK hand R, which is where our weapon is attached on the socket. And then we will go ahead and have that set to copy the translation. And then we will plug this in here. We don't really need to mess with the rotation, we just need to have this, and actually we're going to have this run off of the isDrawing bool. So in theory, the IK target should adjust to that. So let's go ahead and we will not exactly smooth, but you can see that it's actually following where the hand is now. So let's go back into our skeleton real quick, and we're going to actually we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a virtual bone, and we're going to add it onto our hand. So add virtual bone, we're going to scroll down, we're going to find hand R. We're going to call this virtual hand target R. I'm not sure why that has VB in there twice by default, but okay. It keeps putting it back in there, so whatever. We'll just leave that for right now, and what we're going to do with this is we're going to actually set this up so that this will be an offset target for where the actual socket gets set to for our weapon. So that if we go ahead and go back into here, we're gonna, just to make sure that this is actually configuring properly, we're gonna set that back to our weapon socket. Okay, and then from here we're going to go back into here, and we're going to pull this back a little bit, and we're going to add in a transform modify bone. And we are going to get that, and then we're going to add in minus 8.834259. No, it's kind of an awkward number, but that's what I was using in my previous test, so I'm just going to copy what I had before. Your numbers might vary, and if you have the correct animations set up, you might not even need to worry about doing any of this. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to have 5.843664 for our Y value. And then we're going to just have that feed in here, and instead of getting our source bone from the hand, we're going to get it from our target. I'm not sure why that has 3 VBs now. I think that's a bug with Unreal. But now it should be pulling this up, and it'll be adjusting its translation slightly during the animation so that it's offset a little bit, and then That's basically going to be the offset that makes sure that instead of this virtual bone, which we can't really see in here, but the virtual bone here is basically by default, it's at that location right there at the wrist. And while we could adjust it in here, it's not necessarily going to translate to the animation, so we're going to set it at runtime using this transform modify bone node. And then immediately after we set that, we are updating our socket location or on the IK target, or more specifically, we're updating the IK target to match the current translation of where that bone is. So in theory, this should clean it up a little bit. No components to modify selected, either rotation. Yes. We want to, believe it was replace. No, it was add to existing. And then it was parent bone space for translation, and we're not going to worry about the rotation or components space for, or the scale for this, because we're not adjusting the rotation or scale. We just want it to snap directly to. So now if we look at this in here, we can see that since we have this selected, it's looking at the virtual bone, so we can see that the location of it is in the hand. So now when we play, it's not quite seamless. You can see that there's a bit of a sliding going on in there, but it's a lot closer than it was. So now we have the ability to draw and sheath the weapon, but of course as we're running around, our character is still running around as though they're holding it, which looks a little weird. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. So in our animation graph, we're going to go up to our locomotion. We're going to grab this, and we're going to drag this up and copy that, and we're going to add a state. We're going to add a state machine. We're going to call this run state, or we'll call it weapon drawn run state. And then we will feed this in here, and then we will go in here and we will add state and call this idle. And then we will add another state and we will call this one combat, just so we have a clear idea of which one is which. We'll go ahead and we'll drag and start by default going into the idle, and then we will go back to our event graph real quick, and now actually we're going to need to get you, paste you here. Now we're gonna cast to our third person character, and then we are going to get our we want to get our weapon component, which would be weapon R, and then we want to get our child actor from that component, and then we want to get or actually no, we want to cast first to our lightsaber class. And now we want to get is the weapon drawn. And we will go ahead and we will promote that to a variable and call this drawn. So now we have this variable being set, which will tell our animation whether or not the weapon is actually out or not. So we can go back into here and we can go into this, and if the weapon is drawn, we want this to transition into our combat, and if it is not drawn, pull this out and do not boolean. So this will return true if this is false. So if it's not drawn, it'll go back to idle. So if we go back up one more, we'll make sure we got this copied. We'll go into our idle. And actually, no, we want to paste this into here. And then we're going to go into here and we're going to create a duplicate, because we don't really need to change too much with it. We're just going to swap out the animations, but all the configurations are going to be the same. So we're going to change the name of this to weapon weapon run underscore BS, and we're going to get rid of that 2D, because it's not even a 2D, it's a one-dimensional run blend space. So I'm not even sure why by default they even named it 2D, because it's a 1D. Okay, so we're gonna leave this as that. So we're not going to change anything in here. Actually, we're going to close that, and we're going to grab U and replace U with that blend space. So now when we're in our weapon drawn mode, it'll use this blend space. And then if we go back to our idle and we'll paste in the same thing from before, it'll use the other blend space. So we're going to go back into here, and we'll note that we don't want the character walking around with the weapon drawn anymore. So we're going to need our idle animations again. But I don't particularly like the default third-person animations, because something about the way that they're animated, it seems like the character is kind of hunching over a little bit, and they're like raising their shoulders, like they're kind of half shrugging. It just seems kind of awkward. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab a couple more animations from down here, and we'll do from the Twin Blades expansion, and then we will grab, let's see, common idle. I think that one will work. And then we'll grab the walk. That looks like that'll work. And then we want I think that should work. So we'll go ahead and we will grab those three, and then we're probably also going to want to grab these at some point, but we'll worry about that later. So we will grab those, duplicate those, grab our skeleton, common, in place, mannequin, retarget. So now when we go in here, I'll pull this up here. If we look at our idle blend space, we can now grab our idle, and then if we blend over here so we can see it, we can grab our walk, And then blending over into here so that we can see that, we will replace that with our run. So now it should be able to blend between the two states. So it'll not look so awkward as we're running around without the weapon. So let's go ahead and test that. Not sure what was going on with that, with why the lightsaber was on his back there for a second. I think I know what's going on. It's because for the idle animation for this and the run animations that we just grabbed, the IK target is actually animated to the back. Because we still had it equipped in the hand because we were testing where it was at. So let's go ahead and we'll put that back to the sheath so that it's not doing that. So now it's back where it belongs. And then we can run around with it, and then we can put it away. And now our character runs normal. Okay, so I think that's going to do it for this video because it's already running a little bit long. So for the next video, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start tackling the actual combat for doing all the tracing and hit detection. So until next time.